Good morning, everyone. My name is Suzanne Templin, and I help coordinate the webinars for Houseman Johnson Insurance. I would like to welcome you to today's webinar, Secure Act, a Path Forward for Your 401k, presented by John Fryer of Park Capital Management. This webinar is interactive and will feature a question and answer section. You can type a question in during the webinar and John will address it. After the webinar is over, there will be a short survey we are hoping you can fill out for us to give us feedback on the webinar and other topics you are interested in learning more about. This webinar will be recorded and will be available on the webinar archives section of our website. Each attendee will receive a follow-up email with a link to the recording and the presentation slides. I would now like to introduce you to our speaker, John Fryer. John Fryer is a financial consultant with Park Capital Management. At Park Capital Management, he feels at home in the financial environment after earning his Bachelor of Business Administration and Finance and Financial Management Services from University of Wisconsin-Whitewater. John has also earned the designation of Accredited Investment Fiduciary and Certified Financial Planner, which is often recognized as the highest standard in the personal financial retirement section of the financial services industry. After several years working in the industry, John was looking for the opportunity to be part of an independent registered investment advisory firm and found the perfect fit within Park Capital Management. John's passion is to provide his clients with the tools and guidance so that they have the ability to retire when they want, where they want, and how they want. Throughout his many years of financial planning, his passion has evolved into simplifying the retirement conversation. John has also earned the designation of Accredited Investment Fiduciary, which he enjoys using to manage corporate retirement plans, large and small. Welcome, John.
Good morning, everyone. And thank you, Houseman Johnson Insurance, for allowing the platform for Park Capital Management to have the opportunity to present on what we think is a very exciting, which is a rare word for us to use in the retirement planning landscape. But really, we want to take this opportunity as we get into the Secure Act and talk about what it is, where it came from, and ultimately how it is going to affect individuals who help manage and have a fiduciary responsibility for retirement plans. Too often in our industry, we come out with new items or topics that we think are all exciting, and there's really no way to determine how do we implement these things, or what are they actually going to mean for us. This is the first legislation in over 10 years since the Pension Protection Act where there's going to be some meaningful changes, and changes that will involve choices that need to be made. It's going to involve opportunities to discuss, do we need to evolve our plan as things continually move forward? But 10 years ago, we had the Pension Protection Act, which brought us fee disclosure. And that was a really, really good thing in our industry. It brought the ability for plan sponsors, for participants to understand what are the fees associated with that. And that really helped drive down plan cost. This new act is more designed around the idea of how do we help more individuals become eligible for retirement? How do we help provide more options for those participants? And as we get into this, we're going to see some of the provisions in this act do that. Some of them, I think, as we get into this, they're really not going to be very impactful. But we as an industry have made a very big topic of the Secure Act. And we want to make sure that all of you know what this is and what it's going to mean for your plan moving forward over the next year as this becomes implemented. So what is the Secure Act? The Secure Act is setting every community up for retirement enhancement. December 20th, 2019, the Trump administration signed this into law. In the summer of 2019, it passed Congress by 417 to a 3 vote. So if you're counting at home, that basically means there was bipartisan support across the board. I mean, very few things passed Congress by that wide a margin. And the Senate kind of stalled things up last year. And we really didn't think this law was going to come through. And then all of a sudden, 11 days before a brand new plan year, let's implement brand new legislation. So really, really good timing. And again, it was a little bit of a shock to this industry, given that if you remember back in January or early December, there was a lot of other things going on in Washington at the time that we didn't think this would really come to fruition until sometime in 2020. But the goal of this plan is to expand and preserve retirement savings, improve the administration of retirement plans, and then provide some additional benefits to create revenue provisions. So let's just get into what all these things actually mean. And here's a big laundry list of all the items that we're going to be talking about. All of these are not going to be applicable to every single plan. Some of these we think, again, make sense. Some of them we think really don't have a lot of merit, but we still want to address them because probably all of you have received a lot of emails about Secure Act. Record keepers are pushing this out. At the same time, the funny thing is not many record keepers or third-party administrators, TPAs, really know how any of this is going to be implemented. 2020 was going to be the first year in about 4 or 5 years where we had a restatement period. And for those of you who have worked on retirement plans in the past, every 4 to 5 years, the Department of Labor and the IRS says your plan document needs to be amended. Well, 2020 was the start of that amendment period. But oh, by the way, we just decided, less than 2 months ago, we're going to completely change the game with brand new legislation. So there's going to be a little bit of a clunky period in how all of this gets rolled out. And that's part of the conversation today is what do you immediately need to know and what are things that are going to be coming down the pipeline that when that restatement happens, there'll be a decision that you're going to need to make. And that's something that we're really trying to work with our clients is just get them familiar with what is happening in the landscape and where we can go from here. So this is really going to be your instruction manual for initially what we're looking at. And we haven't seen too many things that really explain this. So let's dive into each of these different areas and start talking about the pros, the cons, and also when are these things effective. So an increase in auto-enrollment safe harbor. And first off, I always want to acknowledge safe harbor in our world generally is a good thing. And it can be used in a lot of different terms. Typically, you hear us talk about safe harbor related to a match, but a safe harbor can be related to a contribution, and it really just simply means we're going to give you protection. So the new rule states that a qualified automatic arrangement, or a QACA, would be able to auto-increase an employee's deferrals up to 15%. Currently, that cap is at 10%. We think this is a very good thing in that when automatic enrollment came out, initially groups were doing 3%. That was across the board. We thought if we're going to do this, 3% is the right amount where an individual would decide not to elect out. And then as that's evolved, we thought, 6% is a really good rate to start at. And what we've learned is those might be good rates to start at for an individual to not opt out, but 3 or 6% is not going to get a participant to their desired goal for retirement. And so that cap said, you know what, if you start at 3%, you can automatically increase a deferral percentage 1% up to 10. And again, 10% is a good number, but they decided, let's go to 15. So that's a positive that we see. We're still not seeing across the board utilization of this automatic increase because there can be a lot of administrative hurdles by doing this. Some payrolls are more adept to implementing this, but again, it's something that I think is a good thing, and we're going to start gradually seeing this come more on board. This is effective for plans beginning after 12/31/2019. So in 2020, this is now going to be something that's available. Pooled employer plans, aka what's called an open MEP, or a multiple employer plan if you've heard those before. What is that really? A multiple employer plan is basically where a group of plans who generally have some type of commonality, whether they're part of an association is where you typically see this, pool their assets together to have better pricing. And those plans all work together to create one plan, one pricing, one fund lineup, one fiduciary or trustee, and they go from there. We have not seen this really overly adopted by the industry across the board. But the new rules are going to basically say that instead of now having to have that commonality, we can take unrelated employers and pool them together. So for example, Park Capital Management could create a open MEP plan. And we could say, so anyone who wants to join this plan, and it's going to be standardized, it's going to have one investment lineup across the board. We're going to give you the ability to, change your eligibility here or there, but we're going to limit the flexibility on this plan. It's going to be treated as one plan, and everyone's going to be a part of it. And generally, this is good for smaller plans, generally under $1 million. This is something that's going to be effective beginning after 12/31/2020. So here's where we get into this. Sounds like a really good thing. Like this is really going to add a lot of benefit to plans below maybe $1 million. Well, when you really look at this, there's a couple of things that can be hurdles. For example, if you're a 10-person plan and you join a multiple employer plan, let's say in total there's 200 employees as part of this open MEP. Well, now that MEP is going to be audited. As we know, an audited plan is any group that has 120 or more eligible or active participants in their plan. So now potentially that 10-person plan is going to be audited. There's also an expense with that audit, potentially somewhere around $10,000. Now that cost has to be shared across the board. So what you're seeing is it's a good thing, but in reality, how many groups really implement this? This has kind of been around for a while in some form, and we really haven't seen a lot of groups adapt to this. It was very popular about 7-8 years ago, and it's kind of lost some of that steam over the last 5 or 6 years as pricing for newer plans has really come down. And as we'll see a little bit later, there's a lot of incentives now for those groups that have not had a plan to start a plan. The one positive they did do here is if the qualification issue of one employer would not taint the qualified status of the entire or pooled employer plan. Basically, before this, if one of those plans inside of this multiple employer plan forgot to file or wasn't making payrolls on time, it could, in theory, disqualify the entire plan. They've gotten rid of that. So they are making it better, but in practicality, we're not going to probably see a whole lot of this as an implementation. So lifetime income disclosures. You're going to hear a lot about annuities. And in the financial services world, annuities are a word that can have a lot of different meanings, and it brings out a lot of emotions, some good, some bad. But it's a very hot topic word. One of the new items is employers who are going to provide an annuity option have to, on their statement, provide really some type of annuitization number. So an individual can say, I know what my annuitization is going to look like when I go to retire. A lot of record keepers are already doing this with what they call lifetime income score, meaning they take your balance of $500,000 and tell you, in retirement, this is approximately what your income might look like. So this is really nothing new, other than now they're basically saying we want to make this mandatory, especially if you're going to have an annuity option inside of there. And let's talk about that a little bit more as we look at the provision below there, which is lifetime income provider selection fiduciary safe harbor. Again, we're going to hear that word safe harbor used in a lot of different ways. So right now, if you have an annuity option in your plan, what does that mean? Well, it basically means that a participant would pay an additional amount of money that they would select in order to have some type of guaranteed payout off of their balance. We have not seen this widely adopted across the industry. After 2008, 2009, the Great Recession, we saw annuities across the board really increase because people were afraid of losing that balance. We haven't seen as much of the annuity sales over the last 5, 6, 7, 8 years because of the additional costs that are associated with them. And also, annuities sometimes have a lot of rules, regulations, and can be complicated to understand. So in a 401k atmosphere where we may have hundreds or thousands of employees, how are you going to explain that to an individual when it's hard to explain just to one person, now let alone to the masses? But this is good. If that is going to be an option in your plan, what they're now going to say is, if you go through a certain criteria that will be selected for us, that if you choose an insurance provider and they fail, but you met certain criteria, you'll have a safe harbor protection from making that decision. So right now, it's a fiduciary decision as far as what company you're going to allow to be that annuity provider. And in the past, many plan sponsors and advisors have said, we don't want to take on that liability of determining what insurance carrier is going to be around for the next 20, 30, 40 years. So they've really walked away from that. Now they're saying, if you go through this process, similar to if you worked with us, we go through our fiduciary scoring process for mutual funds, and if you document this, you will have a safe harbor protection if something were to happen to that. The other part of this that we're not sure how is going to be implemented is, for example, securities laws generally across the board, it's a federal regulation. Insurance companies are all regulated at the state level. So how is this going to be implemented? And again, you see no effective date for this. This is one of those things that will be rolling out probably gradually. It sounds good in theory, but we're really not sure how this is going to roll out. But you will see record keepers really start talking about trying to add these annuity features to their plans more so than what they have already. Simplification of safe harbor 401k rules. Was just having a conversation with a third-party administrator this morning on this. This rule, if you hear it, sounds really good. For those of you who have a safe harbor plan, you know that there are required disclosures that have to go out prior to the year starting. Or if you're selecting safe harbor for the first time, you need to do it 60 days ahead of the plan you're starting. Well, that's still in effect for almost all safe harbor plans. So this is, again, where this is a little confusing. And this is only affecting groups that are doing what's called a non-elective safe harbor. And what a non-elective safe harbor is when you decide to do a 3% or greater contribution to all eligible participants, whether or not they contribute any of their own money. So you can think of it really as almost like a safe harbor profit-sharing contribution. Most groups that we work with or talk to do a 401k safe harbor match, where an individual has to put in some of their own money. So this removing of the safe harbor notice is really, again, only for those non-elect plans. But there's some provisions that make this actually very, very nice. Generally, as I mentioned, for a safe harbor plan, you have to elect it 60 days prior to the beginning of the plan year. If you do a non-elect, you can do that up to 30 days prior or 30 days before the year end. So for example, if it's October and your plan is having testing issues, whether from top heavy or a highly deferred compensation, or highly compensated employees, now by November, you can decide we're going to add in a non-elective safe harbor plan, which you've never been able to do, and you can pass testing into there. You can also go back almost 1 year and add in a non-elective safe harbor plan as long as it's at least a 4% contribution to that plan. So there's a lot of new rules related to this. I don't think it's going to affect many groups, but again, if it is, and if it's something you're looking at, this is something new that will be eligible starting in the 2020 plan year. And I want to back up. A lot of things we're talking about can be confusing. So if you have questions, let us know today. You can always reach out and we can walk through these because, again, a lot of times we're not 100% sure how all these things, again, are going to be implemented. This is a big one that affects all individuals, regardless of if you have a 401k plan, a 403b, an IRA. This is across the board. And it's the acceleration of post-death RMD distributions. Currently, how this works is if you are a spousal beneficiary or a non-spouse beneficiary of a qualified retirement account, a 401k or an IRA or 403b, you have the ability to stretch those distributions out over your life period. So, for example, I'll use myself. If my father were to pass away and my mother inherited his IRA, she can stretch that out over her lifetime. And then if myself and my sisters inherit that, we can continue to stretch the tax-deferred growth of that account over our life periods while taking out a certain percentage each year. It's called the stretch IRA. The government has deemed that now moving forward, beginning on 12/31/2019, if you are a non-spouse inheritor of an IRA or a 401k, you have 10 years to fully distribute that account, meaning all those dollars need to be taken out, paid tax on within 10 years. So this is changing some of the planning around distributions of your retirement account. It's changing some of the planning around do we do pre-tax or after-tax contributions. So this is definitely something that's affecting all individuals who have a balance and may pass some of those dollars on. So an increased credit limit for small employer startup costs. This is one of the biggest challenges for new plans or new employers who are saying, we want to offer benefits, but there's a cost, and we only have so many dollars to go around. And many times they're limited into as far as who can they work with, what providers are going to provide them with the tools that they actually need to provide a robust plan. And so currently there's a $500 tax credit for up to 3 years if you start a new retirement plan. So that's pretty good. What they're going to change, though, is to say right now you can basically do up to $250 per non-highly compensated employee who's eligible to participate in the plan, up to a maximum of $5,000. So when you think of TPA startup costs and you think of potentially a record-keeping upfront cost or an advisory fee upfront, which is very typical in startup plans, you can easily be in that $3,000 to $4,000 range. This is a really good way to help employers start these plans and to get groups in place that are going to do a really good job for them. So we think this is a really good thing to help more of these up-and-coming companies get a robust plan started initially right away for their groups, help retain some of those employees. But again, this is only for brand new plans starting after 12/31/2019. Childbirth and adoption withdrawals. This is a big event in someone's life, and a retirement plan is designed to help individuals save for retirement, and it's not meant to be a piggy bank. But at the end of the day, we've all had conversations with participants. It's their money, and it's very hard to tell someone, no, you cannot have your money back. So as part of this is if you're looking to take money out of an IRA or retirement plan for birth or adoption expenses, then you can do that within the year in which it takes place. And you can do that penalty-free. There still may be taxes, depending upon if you have Roth or pre-tax dollars, but you're able to do that. This is a major event in individuals' lives, and we don't want to put groups or individuals in a situation where they feel like they need to take a loan out or they can't afford to do something for what is considered a positive event in their life. So this is a good item that will be effective starting 2020. Small employer automatic enrollment credit. Again, we're trying to find ways to get groups to add some of these newer features in there that are becoming very commonplace. This is for groups under 100 employees, but it's an additional $500 tax credit for up to 3 years for the first taxable year in which an employer adds an automatic enrollment, even if that feature was added after the plan has already started. And again, that started in 2020. So if you've never had an automatic enrollment plan, but you've had a plan for 20 years and you want to add that, there's an additional $500 tax credit for 3 years that's eligible to you. As this industry's changing, as we've talked over the years, no one asks an employee to sign up for potentially a defined benefit program. But you have to sign up most of the time for a defined contribution or 401k, 403b plan. Let's change that item. We're still giving employees the same choice. We're just saying if you don't want to sign up, now you need to opt out. And if you, by the way, you add this option in, we'll give you a tax credit. So we're trying to make this more robust. Certain taxable non-tuition fellowship and stipend payments will now count as compensation for IRA purposes. This isn't really as related to 401k plans, but a lot of times you might work with individuals who are getting some type of stipend or a fellowship payment. And they're saying, you know, we have other sources of income. We want to start saving for retirement. Can we use these dollars to count there? The answer now is yes. Again, back to the goal of the Secure Act, to provide more options for individuals to save. That's what this is doing. I don't think you'll see this too often or come across this in too many cases. Participant loans via credit card, they're going to get rid of that. And I think as we look at this, that's pretty common sense. A few record keepers got really excited about saying, hey, we can offer loans on a credit card form. We'll make it really easy. And what do you start seeing? As we all know in our lives, it's really easy to spend money on a credit card. So they're getting away with that. That's a good thing. You know, loans are there in the case of really an emergency, you need it. They can be a source of funds for individuals, but let's not make it easier than what it already is to do those things via credit card. So that's going away. This next rule or implementation is, again, across the board for IRAs, for any type of qualified retirement plan. Repeal of the maximum age for traditional IRA contributions. So it ends the restriction of IRA contributions for an individual who's 70.5 years of age or older. So prior to that, if you were contributing to an IRA and you got to 7.5, you could no longer make those pre-tax contributions. Again, the goal of the Secure Act, allow more opportunities to save. They've got rid of that rule. So now you can see effective 2020, you can do that. Portability of lifetime income options. Back to annuity conversations. What does this mean? Well, part of the struggles of offering an annuity, again, were, one, is it a good insurance company and who wants to take that risk? But also, let's assume now that you're at Fidelity. And Fidelity has an annuity option. You're a participant. You pay Fidelity an additional 1% above all other plan fees to get a guaranteed payout at some point in retirement. And over the next 4 or 5 years, the plan determines that a switch to a new record keeper would be in the best interest of all participants. Well, if you're the individual who has now been paying 1% for 5 years, you're going, whoa, 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 I've now just paid a fee that I'm no longer going to get a benefit from, because now we're moving away from this option and I'm not going to get it back. They're now saying we're going to allow those lifetime income options to become portable. So a participant is going to be able to transfer that annuity option they're paying for, for example, at a Fidelity, and move that over to the new record keeper if the plan would so choose, or potentially to an IRA. I'm not quite sure how this is going to be rolled out. I'm not sure how they're actually going to handle this, because the portability of an annuity is going to be confusing, and it's going to involve a lot of paperwork. So again, this is something that I think sounds really good, but how this actually gets implemented through the process, I think is going to be another conversation. So it's effective starting in 2020, but again, I'm not sure anyone truly understands how this is going to get rolled out. But it's a good option, again, for if you want to add an annuity option, and I'm still not sure how many groups are really going to look at doing that yet, and it may catch traction. But again, there's a lot of ambiguity yet in how all these new rules with annuities are really going to be rolled out. So more to come on something of that nature. Allowing part-time workers to participate in 401k plans. This is potentially a really, really big item that has kind of got overlooked because there's a few rules with it. So currently, employers are not required to include part-time employees of those working less than 1,000 hours in a plan year. So that's the most restrictive you can be. If you don't work 1,000 hours, we can limit you from being in the plan. The new legislation is going to have a dual eligibility period. So you still can have that 1,000-hour rule, but then it's going to be or if an individual for 3 consecutive years of service completes at least 500 hours of service, they're going to be eligible for the plan. So that could really affect groups that have a lot of seasonal employees that we've currently excluded. In some cases, if you've had interns who work or just limited term employees, if they become eligible for the plan, that can could potentially really mess with a lot of the testing issues that go on. The one rule they have decided, though, is the second eligibility, meaning the 500 hours in 3 consecutive years. You can exclude those individuals from certain testing and from an employer contribution. So as these rules get rolled out and we start talking about these, and these are, again, for plans after 12/31/2020, so we have a little bit of time on this. Most plan documents write, if you're eligible for the plan, you're eligible for the match. So we're going to have to talk with groups and come to a determination. Do we want to allow those individuals to get the match? Do we not? How would that potentially affect testing? And if you choose that you do not want to allow those individuals eligible for the match, we're going to have to go back and amend the plan because we're going to want to go back and exclude that. So that's something that, as this rule gets rolled out, again, it's good, but it's going to have to take effort from everyone involved to make sure that we get it right. Because potentially otherwise we may either be adding or missing groups that we want to have added into an employer match situation. Or, again, we may be adding in a lot more individuals to a plan that we weren't expecting to do. So we have a year to look at this, but it's a conversation that we're going to be having, especially as the document amendments start coming out for this. Increase in age for required beginning date for mandatory distributions. Another really big topic that is going to affect everyone who has a retirement account at some point, unless you're already over the age of 70 and a half. So currently, if you're 70 and a half, you need to begin taking distributions from pre-tax retirement dollars, whether a 401k or an IRA. If you're currently working and you're a non-owner in a retirement account, you do not need to take required minimum distributions from your 401k account, but you do an IRA. The new rule says effective for anyone who attains the age of 70 and a half after 12/31/2019, now we're pushing that back to age 72. Individuals are working longer, and why are we requiring them to take distributions out if they're still working? So this has been a good thing to push that age out to 72 for those individuals, and that's going to be effective 12/31/2019. most record keepers are already going to be implementing that rule in place. And so, or TPAs, when they send out the required minimum distribution list, they will automatically update that generally to 72 years of age. So that'll be something that really affects a lot of individuals moving forward. You can still take out your distributions if you want, but again, that required piece doesn't start until you're 72 now. For those of you who are already 70 and a half, you're going to maintain under the current law that you're still in. Plans adopted by filing due date may be treated as an effect as the close of the year. Again, a really nice provision that sounds good, but probably isn't going to be implemented very often. So this would allow a business to essentially go ahead and say, you know, we're at the end of the year, we're going to start a plan, and we're going to have it implemented as of, you know, the last day of the taxable year. So it's effective for all plans 2020 and beyond, but really it's saying, kind of like an IRA, you can establish an IRA for 2019 all the way up until you file your taxes. You can do the same thing now for a 401k plan. Now, you might ask, well, how would that work? Well, if you're a group and you haven't had a retirement plan and you had a really great year, you want to do a profit sharing contribution, might be an option. Or if you're doing a solo 401k, this might be an option. But for most groups, because you can't allow employee deferrals after the end of the actual calendar year, this wouldn't really make a whole lot of sense for, again, most groups that are out there. But it is something that could affect, like I said, a solo plan or new startup plans that want to do a profit sharing right away. Combined reporting for group plans. Another piece of legislation that sounds like it could be really good, but I think is going to be very rarely utilized. It allows consolidated filing of your Form 5500 as long as there's a similar plan sponsor or trustee group. So where this may come to effect is if you're an ownership group and you have 5 different plans amongst different businesses, you can consolidate all those into one plan. You can do some of that right now. I don't think this is, again, anything that's really groundbreaking or is really going to be implemented all that often. You can see implemented no later than 1/1/2022 and applies to reports for plans years after 2021. So there's going to be some confusion on this as this gets rolled out too, and how this is going to affect and who it may affect. So again, this is one of those that I'd say more to come, but won't worry too much about this new piece of legislation. Modification of non-discrimination rules to protect older and longer service employees. This is really more in effect to defined benefit plans or pension plans as opposed to 401k or 403b plans. But what it basically does is it's going to allow existing participants to continue to accrue a benefit in frozen plans. This is going to be, again, there's an effective date. We don't know yet because, again, they haven't really figured out how this is going to actually roll out for individuals. If you have questions on this, that's something I would reach out to us or to your advisor more specifically due to this. Again, I think this is going to be a lot of a non-issue for most groups as we're looking at this. There's also an increase in penalties for failure to file your 5500. So now it's jumping up to $250 a day, not to exceed $150,000. And again, there's an additional failure to file required notification change would result $10 a day, not to exceed $10,000. If you're working with a good record keeper or TPA, you're not going to miss your 5500 filing. It's hard. They send a lot of notices out. We get involved. Your advisor gets involved. So this, again, is kind of much to do about nothing, not very common. Won't worry about this that much, but just know they're looking to say, hey, if you're not doing these things right, we're going to come after you. There's some additional changes that I just kind of wanted to talk about. Again, increased 5,500 penalty, and then the expansion of Section 529 plans. So costs associated with apprenticeships and qualified education loan repayments will now be effective or able to be used from your 529 plan. Also, some homeschooling expenses would be delayed as well. This was the piece that really held up the Secure Act in the Senate, is they were trying to get some of these things approved. They got it through, and these are going to go back and be retroactive through 12/31/2018. But again, not really related to the retirement plan space, but just wanted to bring that to everyone's attention. So we just talked about a lot of different items, and some of these may be applicable, some of them may not be. Again, we've talked about the Secure Act a ton and what it might mean for you. But at the end of the day, which ones are actually going to require a plan amendment? You know, what are you going to actually have to do in order to implement some of these changes? So if you want to add an increase in auto enrollment, add a pooled employer plan, look at a non-elective safe harbor plan, childbirth and adoption withdrawals, acceleration of the post-death benefit, RMD, portability of lifetime income options, allowing long-term part-time workers to participate in the 401k plan, and increase the age for required beginning date for mandatory distributions. These are going to require an amendment. And most of these amendments will automatically happen unless you would choose not to. Some of them are completely elective. For example, the auto enroll, the safe harbor piece, the pooled employer plan. These are all items, though, that you're going to want to discuss. Do we want to add? Do we not want to add? And I want to be very clear. When TPAs start amending plans, they typically go in and they check all the boxes and they send it to you and they say, sign. With all these changes, you're really going to want to make sure that you sit down and you do a document review and decide, are these the items that we really truly want to have, or are they just adding these? And what if implications do they have for us? Not all these are going to be advantageous to you. So throughout this year, when that restatement period starts, and even into 2021, really sit down and make sure that you're paying attention to this. Call us. We're happy to go through. We do document reviews with our clients and anyone who wants to do one at any point to make sure you understand what's actually here and what's actually going to be available. Which of these changes are optional? And some of them that require amendment are also ones that are optional. So lifetime income provider selection, you don't have to do that. Childbirth and withdrawal. It requires an amendment. You don't have to add it. Simplification of full safe harbor, an amendment, but you don't have to add it. Annuity options are always going to be optional, but may require an amendment. Increase in the auto enrollment safe harbor, the pooled MEP, and then combined annual reports for group plans. A lot of what is out there is optional. A lot of what out there is not going to be optional. And that's where we talk about really making sure over this year and next year, when those amendments are coming out, that you take the time to have a meeting to truly understand what is being added into your plan and is it what you want to have there. With that being said, I still have a lot of questions related to the Secure Act. You know, we're not 100% sure how all this is going to be implemented through. We're trying to do our best to get it out as early as we can so we can start the conversation, and hopefully today you walked away with there's nothing you have to do right now. Nothing to have to do right now, because we haven't figured out how we're truly going to roll all this out and implement it. And most of these items are not going to be anything that's enforceable until the end of the year. So don't go home and worry about this, but at the same time, as the plan year begins to evolve, let's make sure we're having these conversations, we're asking this, and keep making sure that if you have concerns, you're reaching out to either your advisor, your third-party administrator, can call us, and we're happy to have that conversation with you. But the Secure Act is big legislation, some good, some bad, some really no impact, but at any point it's a change, and a change requires everybody's attention as we move forward to make the retirement plan industry more effective for everyone moving forward.
Okay. We do have some questions that came through. One of them is, we have a grandfathered RSEP. Does anything in the Secure Act affect that? I can't even find anyone to update our plan documents.
I have not heard of SARSEPs in a long time. That's a very, very good question. And that's probably something that we're really going to have to dive into, because you just don't see many of them. When I got in the industry in 07, 08, we saw a few of those old plans out there. I haven't seen anything in the legislation that talks about a SARSEP, but it is still a qualified plan, so I would assume some of these rules potentially may apply to that. I would actually recommend you reach out to me, because again, that's going to dive into a deeper conversation. We have access to ERISA attorneys that do not cost you or us or any additional dollars that we subscribe to. So we could put that question out to the ERISA attorneys and see what they say, and that would be my recommendation for the SARSEP.
And also to Lori, who just asked just mentioned that you guys have a SARSEP as well. Do reach out to John, because that's sounds like it's a deeper dive question. We have another question. With a multiple employer plan, is the testing separate? Are both plans combined to reach the 120 participants for testing?
That's a very good question on the MEPs, and the answer to that is yes. And yes, so all the plans, so let's say there's 20 plans. Each of them is going to have their own adoption agreement, meaning they can kind of have their own eligibility, their own match formula. But for testing purposes, they all get wrapped together, and all of those participants involved in those 20 plans in this example are rolled up to determine that 120 eligible or individuals with a balance in the plan for the audit. And that's where these MEP plans have created, in some cases, more additional work, and sometimes even not even saving money for a lot of groups, because all of a sudden there's an audit cost that has to now get spread out over those 20 plans, and there's additional work on the employer to provide audited reports as opposed to just simply census information that you need for non-audited plans.
We have some information here about CE credits for those of you who want to apply for HRCI or SHRM credits for this webinar. And please continue to send in any questions you have. We still have plenty of time for that, but I also wanted to pull up CE credits for those of you who need to hop off and move on to another meeting. Do know that when you close out the webinar feature, there will be a short survey because your feedback is really important to us. And all of you will receive a follow-up email with a link to the recording and the presentation slides. Our next webinar is coming up on March 19th. It's the ACA update with Pat Kelly. And thank you to all of you, and have a great rest of your morning.